Do you want to let Caspian outside before we start? Caspian's crying. Payton's going to go let him outside so he can frolic in the autumn mist. That was Puff, wasn't it? Do you know Puff the Magic Dragon? Today, we're Christmassy, and we're going. I'm going to try and appeal to the young people in the group by playing a TikTok recording, which Pay's been driving me. She wants me to get a TikTok account. So she created one for me without telling me, and I started getting notifications about it, which is a little bit weird. But today I want to talk to you about the Pied Piper of even Exvangelicals. The Pied Piper of Exvangelicals, which is what is leading our kids away from the faith, away from the church, away from God, away from Christ, or whatever you want to put in at the end of that sentence. It's all happening, and it's happening at a hemorrhage-like level. And I think some parents, maybe some that watch the show, might be confused as to why it's happening. I'm going to try and break it down a little bit just from one angle today. Not necessarily, there's not necessarily one reason for anything. You know, there's multiple causation, but I keep seeing a recurring theme over and over, and stories are similar, whether you're listening to the deconstruction testimony of Rhett and Link, otherwise known as Good Mythical Morning, or you follow Abraham Piper on TikTok, or you know the story of Rachel Slick, or just countless people who've left the church, left the faith. Their stories should be heard, and we should, if we want to be a positive influence on that generation and others, we want to understand what it is that they're seeing and why they're walking away, right? And this is something that should have been the norm all along. And yet there's a corner of Christianity that just wants to say, see ya, don't let the door hit you in the Christians would say, Ishta. Can I say Ishta on a Sunday morning? But this idea that, well, people left the faith, they weren't a part of it anyway, or they're not true Christians. And so we're going to talk about that today, but we're going to have some fun. I invited some people on the show. We'll see that in a second. Hang with us. I want to start with showing you a TikTok video by a fellow named Abraham Piper. And, you know, this is like the first TikTok video I think I've seen that isn't silly, or somebody dancing, you know, or drinking iced tea or something. It's just, what, you like the silly ones? Yeah, it's supposed to be a silly medium, but I don't know. Abraham kind of reminds me in a way of our favorite photographer. What's his name from Canada? Do you remember?
I forget.
You forget. Well, anyway, let me just play it, and then we'll talk about it, okay? So let me share it to you, and let's hear from Abraham.
Namely, young people who still live with their evangelical parents but find themselves...
I make the party shine bright when it starts. See, this is what it's normally like, silly stuff.
I want to say something quickly to a very small subset of my audience. Namely, young people who still live with their evangelical parents but find themselves doubting the faith that they were raised in. I know that can be a stressful situation, and I want to offer you one simple fact and just hope that it's helpful. Here it is. It couldn't be more straightforward. It is not disrespectful for you to disagree with your parents. It's not disrespectful to disagree with your parents. Don't let anyone make you feel bad for following your own curiosity instead of their lack of curiosity. That's manipulative. Sure, it might be hurtful that you're on your own path, but that's on them. If someone's offended that you're thinking for yourself, that's only their responsibility. If you're kind and fair, but also take ownership of your own mind and follow your own thoughts, even if they lead away from your parents' religion, that's not rebellious. You can't change how they're going to respond or react, but you can know inside yourself that you're all right. You're all right. Oh, there's so much more that could be said, but I'm out of time. Come along for more if you think that'd be helpful. I want to say something quickly.
So that's Abraham. And you know what? Somebody referred him to me yesterday, and I ended up binge watching a lot of episodes while I was supposed to be working on taxes with my wife. So I couldn't stop watching. And part of it might be because he's just a fascinating guy, interesting guy. And he's got a keen mind, and his skills of observation are unique. But he also comes from a background that I can relate to a bit. He is the son of the famed apologist, evangelist, pastor, John Piper. And he had a very interesting upbringing. He like went to college, Abraham did, when he was 16, studying philosophy. A 16-year-old with a bunch of graduate students around him. But he ended up walking away from his father's faith, and I'm not going to call him an atheist because he doesn't call himself an atheist. If you want to put a label on him, he's probably closer to Buddhist/humanist, but I haven't heard him say he doesn't believe in Jesus or anything like that. But he is definitely not a Calvinist evangelical. He's not that. He's an Exvangelical. And there's millions of people just like him that grew up under similar circumstances that have walked away from it because they've waited and found it wanting, and they find a lot about it ridiculous when they began to think on their own. So this message he's sending out is to younger people who are either making the transition away from their parents' faith, or they're going through this inner turmoil where they want to please their parents and they don't want to necessarily offend them, and yet they find things that their parents believe and that they've taught them, they've communicated down to their children to be either wrong or offensive or ridiculous, or just not their thing. And so sometimes kids don't know how to navigate that or maneuver that. Depending on the demeanor of the parents, that could be a very daunting, traumatic experience. Wendy and I just we hear from people who are going through this because that's what our ministry is. And we just heard from somebody who has spent his life in Christianity, not just in the church, but in training to be a leader of the church, to going to seminary, and has invested his whole life in the church, and he's walking this path now. And he said that last year was the most painful year of his life, the most depressing year of his life, because his whole community doesn't understand what he's going through. This is sad. This is something that I think is regrettable, and it is avoidable if Christians love like Jesus loved. If we don't hold others accountable for what we believe. So what Abraham said here, you know something funny, Poe? I'm going to go to Payton Cam here, which I see a sailboat with some interesting colors going on here. Oh, Payton Cam is awesome. Anyway, some of the strength, and I'm going to play the TikTok video again. It's short. That's what I like about TikTok. My concentration level is geared right to about a minute video, but some of the things that Abraham said here are really profound. Like he said, you can't control how they respond. You can't. So at some point, you have to decide between truth and family. And this is something that Jesus actually said. When Jesus said, I came to bring a sword, right? The Prince of Peace said he came to bring a sword. So there's a paradox there that you have to understand. It's not that he was a violent man or that he wanted to wreck families because he believed in, the strength of families, but he was making a statement about truth, not about families or relationships. He's basically saying, if you love truth, right? I'm the way, the truth, and life. But if you love truth, if you have a relationship with truth, that you put it as a primary concern, the pursuit of truth and the celebration of truth and wisdom, then there are going to be points in your life where you come into conflict with others who don't share it. And you're going to have to make a choice. You're going to have to make a decision. Are you going to, I don't even know what that ding was. These smartwatches sometimes are dumb. But, if you truly are going to pursue truth, it comes with a cost. It might cost you relationships. It might cost you, I don't know, journey. The journey is going to take you through the desert once in a while. It's not going to all be an oasis. If you want comfort, then you're not going to take a stand on anything, really. Because somebody in the room, the moment you take a side in any argument, you're going to offend somebody. If they're so thin-skinned or so shallow that they can't tolerate people who differ from them. And we live in that world lately, if you haven't noticed, politically, religiously, culturally. We live in a world that wants to war with others, a culture war that wants to judge others that wants to label others, that wants to reduce others, that wants to destroy others just because they are others. And this affects the family, this affects church, it affects our relationship with our neighbors. And to be followers of somebody like Jesus Christ, who said to love your neighbor and to love your enemy, that poses a problem. To be a follower of somebody who said, you've heard it said, or you've heard it written, X, in Moses in the Old Testament, but I say Y. And Jesus Christ did do that. He did contradict a lot of what you've heard it written or said. He didn't just refine the teaching about it. He destroyed the teaching of a lot of what X and Y is, including the dietary functions and the judicial and priestly function. A whole bunch. There was a reason that Jews either followed him or wanted to kill him, based on his relationship to that. There was a reason that he was accused of contradicting Moses. He did. Which suggests that Moses had certain things wrong, and that the Israelites who produced the Old Testament or the Tanakh got certain things wrong, and that Jesus was here to correct what they missed of what God the Father was trying to teach them. So anyway, but what Abraham is saying here is profound, because parents have this disconnect when it comes to children. They've heard in Sunday school and Awana, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he shall not depart from it. And they believe that training up is some kind of programming. There's not all Christian parents, but some. So they wrote, teach them. Abraham himself was brought up in a very strict household where he was given the answers. He was given certainty. Certainty was a birthright to him. And because his mind is creative and imaginative and curious, he couldn't stay on that merry-go-round. He had to break free of it because he asked questions. It's funny how certain areas in life we encourage the asking of questions. Education. You've heard teachers say, whether you disagree with it or agree with it, that the only stupid question is the one that's unasked. But, there are corners in certain places where you shouldn't ask questions that are difficult. You shouldn't ask questions that might pull the curtain back on an empty room or, the Wizard of Oz. And some people consider you a troublemaker, a rabble-rouser, or a rebel if you do, as Abraham referred to. And there's some people who have that in their demeanor. They just are naturally inquisitive. And what does the church do with these people? Well, when they're not putting them to death or calling them heretics, those are the very people who kind of lead the Reformation, or who kind of lead the next Great Awakening, who kind of bring the church out of darkness into more light. And so maybe we should listen to some of them. Maybe we should make a place for them, a space for them to ask those questions and to be curious. But there are certain parts of the church where you're reduced to somebody of weak faith if you ask questions that we all think. And then there's other demeanors that just don't want to make waves. They don't want any conflict. And so they're reduced to lemmings or followers, and they just go along with the group, and they learn what the group wants, and so they parrot back what the group wants, or they make sure that they service the group's needs. And they're the ones who win the Timothy Awards in Awana, and who end up going through what Abraham went through and following in their father's footsteps instead of treading their own path. So what I'm saying to you today is, if you're a parent and you want to raise an intellectually curious kid, you might have to break free yourself of some of the restraints, some of the fortifications that Christians have used to hem people into Plato's cave. The next video you're about to see, another young man who happens to work for an organization founded by Francis Collins called BioLogos. It's an organization that seeks to meet Christians or people who are curious at the intersection of faith and science and say that these two don't have to be enemies. That really God's the author of all truth. And so whether you find it in a microscope or a telescope or a passage of Scripture, they don't need to fight one another. That there's going to be an area where maybe there's some confusion, but there certainly don't need to be at swords points. And so here you have three people on stage being interviewed about their experience of Christians growing up in evangelicalism, who've embraced modern science and faith, and how they are treated in the church. And it's important we hear these voices, but here it is.
Mine, who went to the same church. He was the brother-in-law of a pastor. He and I were kind of the two people in church who absolutely loved science. And while my path took me through college, seminary, and now working at BioLogos, this friend of mine is now an atheist. And a few years ago, I sent him a message and just kind of asked him about, we had such kind of similar starting points, and just wondering how we ended up in such a different ending point. And it was the same sort of thing, curiosity, that he mentioned, that he felt that in churches, sometimes he remembers even from a young age, asking some kind of skeptical question about something he was being told, and being really discouraged from doing that. And he saw the exact opposite in the scientific world. Being curious, asking questions is rewarded. From his experience, Christianity discouraged curiosity and question asking, whereas you can't do science without curiosity and question asking. So this same kind of curiosity that can fuel both communities and should fuel both communities was something that ended up being kind of a wedge between the two.
So that was David Buller of BioLogos, and he's talking about his experience and his friend's experience growing up in the church, and how questions are encouraged in science, but they're discouraged in the church. So this is an area where I think that we need to consider what I call the Pied Piper of Exvangelicalism. Exvangelical is a term used to describe the exodus of our youth away from the faith, away from the church, because it is a phenomenon unlike any other time in Christian history. We've seen kids go away from the faith and then come back when they get married and have children of their own, and this is not happening now. They go away and they don't come back. And like any other organization, and Christianity is a community, we should ask why that is happening. If Payton and I ran a restaurant and we consistently were filled every weekend, and then all of a sudden our attendance, people, our clientele was cut in half. We'd want to know why, right? Is it something that we have done? Has the service gone down, or the quality of the food? Or is it something that opened up down the street, maybe a new restaurant and competition is greater? We would want to know why this is happening. And it's not strange for Christians to ask, why is this happening? And I think it might be a bit of both of those answers. It might be something that we are doing wrong as followers of Christ and the community known as the body of Christ or the church. And it might be something that is in competition with the current church. I think it's a bit of both. And I think the experience itself has been weighed and found wanting. Now, how do you explain this? How do you explain people like, say, Justin Bieber and Kanye West, who don't have a back experience with the church coming into it? And how do you explain people like Abraham Piper, who've grown up in the church, and Rhett and Link and Josh Harris and others who've grown up in the church and who can't wait to escape it? I'm going to use a piece of art to try and demonstrate this. This is a piece of art by Ann Wipf. And it, I don't know if it's called Escape in the Merry-Go-Round, but you kind of see the horse breaking free of the carousel. And here's a closer picture of that. She's done a couple of versions of this. And I just find it absolutely beautiful. A friend shared this the other day and made a comment about it. And the first thing I thought of when I saw this painting is escaping Plato's cave. So I shared it and I used that caption. This is what it feels like to escape Plato's cave. If you don't know the allegory of the cave, maybe you're familiar with M. Night Shyamalan's movie, The Village, which is kind of an allegory of the allegory of the cave. And the motif is just explaining that you've grown up in a cave and that's all you know and that's the only education you have. And you're taught that the shadows are scary, but you're taught not to leave the cave because it's even scarier out there. And there's monsters out there. And so you grow comfort around the tribal campfire within the cave, and you learn all the tribal myths, and you share them with your children. And you could spend your whole life in this cave, never exploring outside of the cave and seeing the abundance of life that lives outside it. If you're brought up in that experience and you're told, well, frankly, ghost stories about those things which you might be curious, then that might be enough to fortify you, to scare you into staying in place, to have you choose the comfort of the group and the acceptance of the group and the ideology and the philosophy and the religion of the group. And yet you feel a cool breeze coming from the mouth of the cave, or you hear some interesting noises, and somebody is going to leave the group at some point. And it could be a rebellious kid or it could be a curious kid. But for some reason, when they leave the group, it feels like this. They get off the merry-go-round, and this may be what your children have experienced by walking away from your Village Baptist Church or whatever. And they feel a freedom that they didn't know before, but they also feel more alive than they've ever felt before. I'm going to show you the other version, the recent version that she's done of the same work. So it's a fascinating work. I think it's a beautiful work, and it's thought-provoking. And why do I use this as a motif for coming into freedom? I'm not suggesting that walking away from God or Christ is freedom, although it could feel this way. The homosexual who comes out of a closet certainly feels this way, who's lived his life on a merry-go-round, oftentimes by other people's rules, by other people's idea of what they're meant to be, this plastic character that really has no mobility at all, going around and round. to a circus song that never changes. And when they actually come out and embrace their identity and stop lying, it feels like what you see in this picture. And the truth is that children who have left the church feel this way. They don't, if they feel bad at all, it's because they've been shamed and shunned by those who are still on that merry-go-round. And so here's the crux, as they say, of the relationship. If you are a parent to an exvangelical, you've got a lot of work to do because they haven't felt heard. They may have only felt judgment from you, or shame, or shunning, and what they feel that they're pursuing is the truth. And they are welcomed into a community that doesn't shame them for asking the tough questions, that encourages it. And so here's the thing that, the bread we've been serving in our restaurant is stale. And maybe you haven't noticed it, but it's been brought to your attention now. So you can't just put it all on the customer. You can't just say, well, the customer doesn't know how great a restaurant we are, or how hard we work in the kitchen, or how much we have to put up with the unruly customer. It's not the customer's fault in this case. And as somebody who cares not only about our relationship with God, but our relationship with our children, one of the first steps is to realize that there's a bone that's out of joint, and it's not the customer's fault. Our children may have had an interest in science, and that has been blunted in Sunday school. Maybe you didn't even do it as a parent, but maybe your youth pastor did, or your church did, or your denomination did. I'm not trying to put the blame on the parent at all, but I'm saying when kids walk away from the faith, it might be that they lean Democrat politically, and they were brought up in a conservative Christian church that mixed the gospel with conservative politics or something like that. And so this young person grew up having a different feel for government responsibility and couldn't discern the difference between the words of Christ and the words of Ronald Reagan or something, or Donald Trump, and said, wait a minute, this doesn't, there's something wrong here. This doesn't smell right. And they've walked away from the faith because they believed you. They believed the gospel that they were given. They believed the binary that was presented to them, that this is true Christianity. Maybe it was young earth creationism. And they grew up being taught, and maybe even believing and accepting, that the earth is only 6,000 years old, and that all the animals were on an ark, and that there was a global flood, including T-Rex. And then they get any education at all, in any field at all, and they realize that this is like believing in the tooth fairy to believe that, or believing in this massive conspiracy theory that all the scientists in the world are under Satan's spell and lying to shield the fact that the earth is young, and that Noah actually bunked with T-Rex. And if you think that that's a small problem in the United States, I think a small majority of Christians actually believe that and project that onto their youth. So a lot of the reason people leave the church is the conflict with science, a lot of it with the conflict with politics, and a lot of it is with a misconstruction of what the Bible is and says. And so we've made the Bible into an idol. We've committed bibliolatry, and they have some problems with areas in the Bible, and so they walk away from the whole thing. So what are we to do? Well, first thing we need to do is realize that God wants us to love our children no matter what. And we don't gain any ground with them by not listening to their stories or their questions, not making room for their doubts. Abraham Piper, the man I showed you there, is very creative, very imaginative. As a matter of fact, his business is he makes jigsaw puzzles and sells jigsaw puzzles, and they're beautiful. You know, puzzles of the earth or the moon or different kinds of geometric, interesting shapes and colors. And I'm not a puzzle guy. Puzzles bore me to death, but people who are, they do it for therapy. They do it to relax. I would choose to do other things, but I think they're beautiful. I think they're beautiful. And so here's a kid who had these creative urges. He had this imagination which was God-given. He had a natural curiosity which is an element of high intelligence. And yet he felt boxed in with all this because he was trying to please the group that he grew up in, the cave in which he was born and existed. And it was a very Calvinist, very fundamentalist upbringing, which had all the answers. And some of those answers contradicted the other answers. And he was smart enough to realize it. And if you watch some of his TikTok videos, especially the one about hell, he started to ask questions that great theologians of the past have asked and found different answers than the Sunday school answers and room for it. And he didn't find any room for it in the end. There was no room for Abraham Piper's intelligence, intellectual curiosity, imagination, and doubt. And so what are kids going to do? If you love truth, you're going to leave. You're going to escape. You're going to break free of the merry-go-round and run, as they say, like the dog who finds the gate's been left open. And what does that do to our relationships? Well, if we're loving parents, we want to be on that journey with our children, not prohibit it, not inhibit it, not make up ghost stories and use fear or shame as a tactic to create obedience. As a matter of fact, a lot of times this curiosity and this doubt is showing spiritual growth. So parents, you shouldn't be scared of it. You should be encouraging it. Instead of making spiritual growth painful. I want to end with this, and then we'll go to Payton Cam. There's a story that C.S. Lewis tells that I think is absolutely fascinating, and he doesn't tell it for the same reason I do. I'm applying it in a different way, but I think it's true. He talks a story about proximity to home. He's saying that sometimes you have to go further away from home to get there quicker. And he uses the example of if you're in the valley, but your house is on the mountain. And the closest distance to that house might be straight up, but you're not Alex Honnold, and you're not going to free solo the dangerous cliff. And there's already a road up to your village, but that road winds around the mountain. And so at some point, standing right under your home, which might be a mile up this precipice, you have to walk away from it to get closer to it. You have to walk geographically further from it to get closer to it in proximity. And Lewis used this as a metaphor for the mindset of some people. And so I'm going to say this to you, and this might be a challenge to you, but when the atheist pursues the truth, or the agnostic, when the atheist or the agnostic or the exvangelical or the former fundamentalist, when the atheist, I'll just use atheist because that's the most stark contrast to the theist or the believer. When the atheist is in the pursuit of truth, I don't care if he's skeptical. Skepticism is healthy, cynicism is not. Skepticism is natural because we live in a world where there's deception and danger. So skepticism is built into us, and it's a God-given defense mechanism. Cynicism is something we grow in our own garden. But So when the atheist is in the pursuit of truth, whether he is further from home than you and I would like him to be, he's actually closer to home. He's winding around the mountain on his own path. And so when the atheist is in the pursuit of truth, he's actually coming closer to God than would the theist who sat in Plato's cave his whole life and been programmed to believe Christian error, Christian untruth, Christian distortions of who and what God is, and what God has said, and what God wills. So, one thing we shouldn't do is panic when our children leave what we think is the right path. And we shouldn't say that path is too dangerous, or you're going to end up in hell, or it's a slippery slope, or blah, blah, blah. Because in their mind and in their experience, they're pursuing the truth. And as parents, we should have instilled that story in them since they were very young. Though, well, the saying about justice, justice though the heavens may fall. That's the same about truth. Truth, though the heavens may fall, because the heavens that you believe in might not be real. Because we're fallible, and we're mortal, and we're not omniscient. And we can't all be right. And it's far more likely that we're all a little bit right and a whole lot wrong. And so humility should require us to say, do you mind if I walk with you? And don't walk with them trying to correct every a step. Maybe take a period of time where you just listen to them. You listen to their doubts. You listen to their questions. You listen to their questions, and you maybe offer questions that you're still struggling with. The most dangerous thing for somebody who's going through this period of doubt is to find a parent with all the answers and complete certainty, who's too prideful to say, I don't know, who's too prideful to say, well, I wrestle with this too. I have doubts about this too. I grew up being taught this, and yet it doesn't seem like a just or a loving God would say that or act that way. The most dangerous point in a relationship with somebody who's going through that kind of doubt is to act like you've got all the answers, and if you don't, Frank Turek does. Or I'm going to say Ravi Zacharias, because Ravi Zacharias was Christianity's famous hero until we find out he sought the happy ending at his massage parlor. So the most dangerous thing that we can do is say, we've got all the answers here in the cave, and those voices you want to go listen to or you want to consider, they're under satanic spell. Don't listen to them, because they're actually going to university and finding value there. They're actually watching TED Talks and finding value there. They're actually listening to Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and finding value there. And you know what? If you took the time to listen to, you'd find value there too. You might not agree with everything, but you'd find value. It's not cotton candy. So that's all I have really to say to you today is we need to listen to our children. We need to listen to people who've walked away and are taking a different path. We need to encourage the pursuit of truth no matter what. And if you are actively right now shaming or shunning your child because the child has chosen a different path, you are part of the toxic Christianity that creates more atheists than atheism itself. And I would ask you to repent of that and to pray to God to soften your heart and to open your mind and your ears to your children's experience and what they're going through. All right, that's you look bored.
I do the drawing.
All right, why don't you walk us through what you got today, Chloe?
This one is a puppy.
He looks like a happy puppy.
Yeah, he's just a little puppy.
Yeah, a little brown ball of fur. Is his name Payton, or you just signed your artwork really big?
I just signed my artwork really big.
All right. Does he have a name?
No, I didn't name him yet.
Okay.
And then And this is a picture of Caspian who's been in a bunch of mud.
Caspian, who's been in a bunch of mud. So this is curious. You name the cat. You don't name the dog. I'm not going to hold that against you.
Well, the cat is actually my pet, so I actually have Caspian.
Yeah,
The
and
dog, I
yeah,
don't
you're right.
have him,
You don't have a dog, do you?
I have Bella, but this is a different dog.
Okay.
This is actually
So Caspian got into the mud. There's not a whole lot of mud in our backyard.
No.
He must have gone in someone else's
into
yard.
the neighbor's yard.
Oh, okay.
And then this is a boat that's in a storm.
A boat that's in a storm. I bet you I know what inspired that one.
We're watching a movie about a storm and a boat.
Perfect Storm. We're watching The Perfect Storm, and it wasn't perfect for Mark Wahlberg. I'm just going to say that. I hope I'm not ruining anybody's. My smartphone has told me it's time to stand up and move a little for 1 minute. So, folks, I guess that's our cue to say thank you for listening. We hope that this show inspires thought. We hope that this show is welcoming to those of you who have been Christians all your lives, who are curious about what it means to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. This show is for those people who've walked away from Jesus Christ or walked away from the faith, or who don't feel that they have a seat at the Father's table, or who think that it's just a bunch of bunk. We want to explore these issues with you, and we're grateful that you spend a little time with us on Sunday morning to do that. So if it's been helpful to you, share it with a friend. Maybe watch it again later in the week with somebody you love. And we hope we've been a blessing to you as you are a blessing to us. So we'll see you next week. You going to say goodbye?
Goodbye.
You look like Waldo. Waldo with a Santa on your shirt.